Hi everyone. In this video, we are going to be looking at Retrofit library, which is an Android library for easily connecting your app with an endpoint. We are going to be making use of the MVVM library, and we are also going to be making use of the coroutine library for our asynchronous process. So in our Gradle, we already added the necessary dependencies that we'll be needing: the Retrofit library, the Moshi library, which is going to help convert our response objects, the view model for our MVVM architecture, the navigation library, as we are going to make use of the navigation component, and also the COI library for displaying the network images. We also have added the enabled view binding, as we are going to be using it for referencing our layout views. Also, we already have our adapter partially set up. We have created the adapter. We have created the view holder, which we have attached to the adapter. Also, we have two of our fragments which are going to make use of, which is the main fragment and the detail fragment. In our nav graph, we have added the main fragment and the detail fragment and linked them to each other, and added an action from the main fragment to the detail fragment. Next, let's look at the API we are going to be using. And the API is the Cocktail DB API, which we are going to be listing our alcoholic cocktails and the detail of each of the cocktail. The first endpoint, which is to list the alcoholic cocktails, it comprises of the string of the name of the cocktail, an image for the cocktail, and the ID of the cocktail of each cocktail. Then the second endpoint, which is going to be showing the details of each cocktail. We are going to be passing an ID of each cocktail that we select. Once we pass the ID, to the query URL, we are going to be displaying the detail of that cocktail. So first, let's grab our base URL. This should be our base URL. We are going to start setting up our retrofit. Let's create a folder for all our API classes. So first, let's create an API service file. So in this API service file, we're going to be creating the interface to communicate to Retrofit. We're going to be constructing our Moshi converter. We're going to be constructing our Retrofit, and at the same time creating a singleton class for easy access to the API service. So first let's create our base URL. And this is our base URL. Next, let's create the interfaces. We're going to be needing two interfaces. We're going to call it API service. So to fetch data from a REST API, the retrofit has a get method which you can use to let the endpoint know that you are requesting for data. So we're going to be creating a method here and call it a coroutine method and call it get drinks. So the suspend here tells this suspend here indicates that this is a coroutine method, so that can enable us to run this process asynchronously, because this is going to be a network. This is going to be a network call. So this get method is going to require a value, and this value will be, let's copy the full endpoint. This is the full endpoint for fetching the alcoholic cocktail. We have already created our base URL. So now let's take the remaining parts of that and of that URL. So this is the base URL, and this is a query parameter. This is a query parameter. Whatever that comes after this question mark is a query, is seen as a query. And in Retrofit, we have a method for that, which is called query, and accept the value, the query values. And here our own query value is A. So we need to add A and create it as a string. Let's call it drink. Since we have created our query, we don't need this anymore, because this query represents this final part of the URL. But then we need to tell our method what's the kind of response it needs to return. So now let's create our data classes to represent the response that we are expecting. So let's create the first one and call it drink. This is the first endpoint, and this endpoint contains first, it contains a JSON object of drink. This drink is a list. This represents an array of objects. This is an array of objects. So our first array is called drinks, and then this is our inner object, and we are calling it drink. This inner object contains a string of the drink name, the drink image, and the drink ID. So this is it. Let's just leave it here while we set it up. So we can save our drink name. Var drink thumb, which is the thumbnail. which is also a string. And then we can say val drink ID, which is also a string. So this is our own name that will make it easier for us to reference it. But then the endpoint itself is expecting these names here, which the response has given to it. And to let the response, to make sure that our response, the endpoint recognize what we are, the data we are sending to it, we have to annotate, we have to let it give, we have to find a way to make sure that these names also reflect on the variables that we created. And that is what that is what the Moshi library does for us. This Moshi library, that is what it does for us. So here, what we are going to be, the Moshi library has an annotation called JSON, and here we are going to be adding the endpoint representation. So now we have added these annotations to to make sure that the endpoint recognizes the data that it's expecting us to send to it. Okay, so now we can remove this. So now we just created the first object. Now we need to create the main and the main response. You can call it drink response. So here we're going to just call it var drinks, and going to be a list of drink. So just to go over what we did again, we have an inner object of 3 strings, which is the name, the image, and the ID. Then we have an array called drinks. So first, we created the inner object, and then we created the drink, the base response. Here we don't need to annotate it because drinks is exactly what the endpoint is expecting. As we have given it that variable, we don't need to use the Moshi annotation on it again. So in our API service, we need to let it know that it should return the drink response. So we also need we need to create our second interface, which is going to be the detail of each cocktail. And for this detail, the response looks similar to the other list of alcohol. So we are going to be doing exactly the same thing here, but there are so many informations there, but we are going to be taking just 4, which is the drink ID, the drink name, the drink thumbnail, and the drink instruction. So going back to our Android Studio, we are going to be creating another response. But first, let's create this method, then call it drink detail. So this is let's go ahead and copy the full URL that we will be calling. So first, let's create the data classes. Can call this drink detail. And the drink detail, we have almost similar data. So let's just copy this and paste it here. Then one more thing that we need to add is the instruction, which is also a string. And then we need to annotate it with the JSON, because the REST API is going to be expecting a string instruction. So let's let it know. Okay, so now let's create the base response for this detail. Drink detail response. And just like before, we are going to call it var drinks, but this time it's going to be a list of detail of drink detail. So going back to our API service class, we are going to be returning drink detail response. This is the remaining part of the URL, and then we are going to be needing to query the ID, which is recognized with the query I, and then we are going to say drink ID. So what exactly are we doing here? First, this is the base URL which we have created here. We are going to be appending it to the retrofit. We are going to be appending it while constructing our retrofit. Next, this is the base URL which ends here. Then the get method for the data I want to fetch, which we are adding here. This for the main list and this for the detail. And then the query parameters, which everything that comes after this question mark means there are queries. And in our own case, A comes after the question mark. So retrofit has a query method for doing that, and we have added the query method, and then we are adding the A as the value for the query, and then for here we are adding A and I for each of the URLs for the query. Then we are giving it a we are creating a variable where later on inside the code we are going to be passing both this alcoholic and this ID. So far I think we are done setting up our API service classes. So next we are going to start creating our repository class and our view model classes.